So, balancing scientific integrity, business viability, and patient outcomes. I'll be taking us through today some of the experiences and lessons we've learned delivering commercial clinical trials with psychedelics, and in particular, what wider clinical development can learn from these trials, as well as how wider clinical development practices can improve the trials within psychedelics. So first, for anyone not familiar with Clerkenwell and what we do, I'll give a quick background to the company and our activities. Then I'm going to focus on the following 4 areas: the patient's clinical trial journey as set and setting, commercial trial design, how we build in and optimize efficiency and speed into our trials, regulatory challenges and leaning into complexity, and finally, what can the wider industry learn from psychedelic clinical trials? Oh, hang on, this one too. There we go. We there? There. So, we founded Clerkenwell just over 4 years ago, during the initial explosion in commercial interest in clinical development with psychedelics. While our focus has since expanded to also focus on other areas of psychiatric and CNS clinical development, our original aim and core competency has always been on improving the provision and delivery of clinical research with psychedelics. So we saw 4 issues that were really affecting trials in this space. First is lack of appropriate trial sites, their setting not being appropriate for psychedelic trials and psychiatric patients, academic centres and hospitals being stretched for resource, and contracting and site setup taking a long time and being very slow. Secondly, slow participant recruitment. This isn't an issue just within psychedelics, this is an issue across all of clinical development and especially psychiatry. But access to patient pools was limited and patients are hard to reach. Inclusion and exclusion criteria for participating in trials were often unrealistic, and innovation in recruitment was lacking. Thirdly, we saw a lot of inconsistent delivery between sites, so variability in site performance, leading to delays and jeopardizing trial integrity, and inconsistent adherence to protocols impacting data reliability. And lastly, there was limited experience within commercial CROs at the time, so often they would apply standard cookie cutter models that weren't really appropriate to the nuances of psychedelic clinical trials. And designing practical and approvable studies in this space is quite challenging. So we set up Clerkenwell Health to attempt to address these issues. We are, to use the industry terms, a combined CRO, contract research organisation, and SMO, site management organisation. This is a relatively rare business model for companies delivering trials beyond phase 1. Typically, phase 1 units will take on both CRO and site activities, but then as you move through to later stages, this combined approach is seen less often. By bringing the 2 pieces together to learn from each other in one company, we can effectively address those challenges that were facing psychedelic and wider psychiatry clinical trials. Both functions can also act independently, so we provide CRO services to trials running at other sites, and we also can operate as a site on trials that are being managed by external CROs. And we operate on trials from phase 1 through to phase 3, although the majority of our work tends to fall within phases 2 and 3. So what do? On the CRO side, we offer clinical development services, clinical development advice, regulatory engagement, clinical design services, including submission of clinical trial applications, as well as management and monitoring of trials during delivery. On the site side of things, we deliver the trials themselves, including all the typical trial delivery activities of screening, dosing, prep and integration sessions, and follow-up visits. We also have a healthcare practitioner training program. We've already launched the Foundations program publicly, and we should be launching the skills-based program later this year. And we have a partnership ongoing now with Roehampton University, which ultimately aims to gain accreditation for our healthcare practitioner training program. Our site network is now growing, so our first 2 sites are based in London, but we have plans to open 3 more throughout the UK by the end of the year, which will allow us to recruit to our trials from a much wider patient pool. The benefit of having a network that is of having a network is that it addresses the issue of variable performance and experience across sites, so we can centralize management, standardize processes, and ensure consistent high-quality delivery across all our sites. This also allows us to have an efficient and joined-up approach to some of the more specific operational challenges posed by these trials. So provision of therapists and independent raters, and experience with Schedule 1 controlled drugs licensing. So in fact, I came straight here from our third site where we've just completed our license inspection visit with the Home Office. So just a quick note as well on our 2 London sites. So our Welbeck site has been operational for just over 2 years and was very much our proof of concept. Our Baker Street site has been open since November last year, and Welbeck has 3 treatment rooms. Baker Street is double the capacity with 6 treatment rooms. Both hold Schedule 1 licenses, and we have a vetted patient database of over 30,000 patients. We have access to 6 different PIs and a wider clinical team, including over 40 therapists, and we operate at speed to ensure that we can meet commercial timelines and targets. We have 10 trials either completed or currently active, 8 of which are with psychedelics, as well as contributing to a further 13 trials with other activities, mainly on the CRO side, and we've dispensed over 200 doses. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what we do and why we do it. Fundamental to the service we provide is the patient journey. And in particular, I wanted to discuss its relevance within the context of our understanding of set and setting. So obviously, set and setting as we understand it within psychedelics is the environment and non-drug components of psychedelic-assisted therapy. However, beyond some specific elements, so the therapy manual, the music program, and in some cases, the physical setup within the room, very little of the experiential aspect of the wider patient journey is protocolized. The trial visits and activities are set, but then how these are delivered can play a huge part in the experience of the participant as they move through a trial, leading up to the dosing sessions, and also as they integrate their experience following it. Aspects here can include everything from the patient's experiences on screening calls, their travel to and from visits, and interactions with all members of the research team, not just the therapist. The extent of the therapist's rapport is known to correlate with outcomes, but the groundwork for how that rapport can be built can start long before the participant's first interaction with their trial therapist, through their earlier interactions on the trial, and then be built on throughout as they progress. This can have a direct impact on their outcomes, obviously, but also on other key areas of performance of the trial, so recruitment, patient retention, and compliance rates. At Clerkenwell, we've taken the ethos of building in the elements of a conducive set and setting to the whole patient journey. And this has created a virtuous cycle of very high retention and compliance rates, which for us means higher quality clinical data. And fundamentally, that's the service we're providing, provision of that high quality clinical data. This might seem obvious, treat patients with care and attention, but for mainstream research sites not used to understanding the significance of these interactions, it's not necessarily built into the way they operate. And providing this level of patient centricity and care, while limited to the restrictions of a given trial protocol, requires efficiency and effort and a whole team that really understands what we're trying to deliver with these interventions and why these things are important. Just another point to touch on the patient journey. So we've built our sites to offer a very non-clinical feel with set and setting in mind. And I'll touch on the relevance of this again later in the talk, but really this slide is just an excuse to show some nice pictures of our site. Oh wait, hang on. There it is. I'll leave it on a bit longer as we didn't get to look at them. Commercial trial design. How do we ensure the trial we design can be as efficient as possible, both structurally and operationally? So it's worth, I think, just clarifying the distinction between a commercial trial and an academic trial. This is an oversimplification, by the way, but I think it helps us understand the difference in approach taken. So our work predominantly focuses on commercial trials, those where the trial sponsor is a drug company looking ultimately to get the drug approved for use as a medicine so they can sell it. This is opposed to researcher-led trials conducted within universities, which are conducted with the aim of understanding more about the therapeutic potential of interventions, their mechanism of action, and improving their applicability. Obviously, there's overlap between the two, but that's a kind of broad distinction. Commercial trials are drug-focused. Regulators want to know whether the drug is safe and effective and want to understand this as clearly as possible. This obviously creates a problem for companies developing psychedelics for use in psychedelic-assisted therapy. Companies have taken differing approaches to dealing with this, whether it's dialing down their therapy component or using some kind of linguistic sleight of hand to avoid referring to the psychotherapeutic component as therapy. But this also creates a challenge designing these trials when essentially all their work is building on earlier researcher-led trials that are essentially the proof of concept, which were able to place the therapy component far more centrally in the intervention. Another note, although commercial trials typically have much larger budgets than investigator-led trials, they're also in far more of a hurry, whether this is because they need to produce results for investors, or because they need to do this before their funding runs out, or because they ultimately have a countdown timer placed on them by their IP protections. Commercial trials need results quickly. And lastly, outcomes. So there are very clearly defined data requirements for drug approvals. Collecting interesting but irrelevant data can slow down trials, cause operational difficulties, and increase costs. And so these are typically left out. That said, where trial data can provide useful context for the design of future trials, so for example, when you're trying to figure out how to make a phase 3 as effective as possible, these additional data points may well be worth incorporating, such as biomarker data or qualitative feedback. Almost all the trials we design at Clerkenwell have been adaptive trials. So these are quite commonly seen in wider drug development, but currently less so in psychedelics due to their complexity. So adaptive trials have one or several components of optionality built into them. This allows for huge administrative and operational efficiencies to be built in, as it reduces regulatory approval times, management and training costs, and so on. So to give a simple example, an adaptive trial might look like this. A trial consists of 2 stages. First is an open label dosing stage. After this is completed, an interim analysis is conducted on the data from this first stage, and the optimum dose is chosen for stage 2. In this case, a placebo-controlled 2-arm crossover. But only one protocol, one clinical trial application submission, and one controlled drugs license is needed, and there's additionally no unnecessary delay between finishing stage 1 and beginning stage 2. So the whole process can move far more efficiently and with less expense. Adaptive design elements are protocolized by clearly defined rules on how these decisions will be made during trial delivery. And they can encompass a whole range of elements. So patient population, visit or dosing schedule, follow-up length, and ultimately they create more intelligent and efficient data sets. Essentially, what adaptive trial design components turn our trial protocols into is choose your own adventure books within the bounds of clinical development. With interventions as complex as psychedelic-assisted therapy, incorporation of these adaptive elements could help us learn much more about the non-drug components of psychedelic-assisted therapy going forwards. And this is where I'd like to see things moving, both within commercial trials and also researcher-led trials, where it would help us understand far more about the psychotherapeutic component or changes to dosing schedule, all these kind of variables which in the trials that are being conducted currently there isn't really space for. Regulatory challenges, so leaning into complexity. So I've already touched on complexity as a challenging factor in psychedelic trials and one that can put off regulators, but when worked with, such as with adaptive trial designs, this complexity can produce better data and more efficient trials. So, Lycos Therapeutics experienced last year with the FDA's rejection of MDMA-assisted therapy provides, I think, a useful example of regulatory challenges and where to lean into complexity. I won't dwell on the full details or blow-by-blow account of the events, but crucially, the FDA highlighted a number of issues with the data as they saw it. So methodological issues, including issues with blinding and expectancy, and controls around the psychological intervention. Some specific pieces of missing data as well, and then additionally, perceived misconduct, both from therapists and also from the central research team. So there's lots more to unpack here than I have time for with this talk, so I'm going to focus on a few of the elements that we've identified in the field through our own experiences. So first is blinding and expectancy. Partly I'm mentioning this just so that I can put that cartoon up on the slide because it's one of my favourite. But it's well known with, that blinding and expectancy are almost insoluble issues with psychedelic trials. And plenty has been said and published about how these issues should be addressed. An openness to these issues is essential when interpreting trial data, but there are operational and design tools that can be used to reduce their impact, using independent raters, carefully managing expectations, and patient-facing language, and using technology to monitor for functional unblinding. Additionally, using low and medium dose comparators as opposed to placebo can help address this. The psychotherapeutic intervention. So this really is one of the trickiest questions that the FDA raised and one that companies have been reflecting on subsequently. How to account for and measure the impact of the psychotherapeutic component. Therapist selection, training and monitoring is core to this, and we've adopted the use of AI monitoring tools at Clerkenwell to allow for analysis of therapist fidelity to the therapeutic model that they will be delivering in an individual trial, functional unblinding, and so on. However, it's worth noting that these attempts to monitor, if not employed carefully and with consideration, could impact the delivery of the therapeutic component itself and undermine the actual trial delivery. So I was on a panel recently with Steve Birchall. I don't know if he's here. He's somewhere at the conference, but he's a therapist who's acted on many trials, including some of ours, and he gave a brilliant first-hand account of the therapist's perspective of attempting to provide therapy within the limitations of psychedelic clinical trials put on. So attempting to hold space and create rapport when every word is monitored and constant interruptions for physical assessment or patient reported outcomes are required. These trials don't give therapists an easy task, and so attempts to measure this aspect of the intervention need to be built with this understanding and with the input from therapists themselves. So it's not placed on them just externally. Research integrity. So MAPS, Lycos, didn't use a CRO in their trials. They did this in-house. So this isn't necessarily uncommon. So many of the larger pharma companies do this. However, in areas such as psychedelics, where sponsor impartiality is far more likely to be closely scrutinized, using a CRO to place distance between the sponsor and the trial delivery becomes more crucial. Our own reputation to produce the highest quality data it is crucial to our own operation. Of course, we want to see these treatments succeed, but we understand that our role within that process is to ensure that we commit to producing the highest quality data from trials that we're involved in. So what can wider clinical development learn from psychedelic clinical research? Our approach, patient-centered with a focus on the patient journey as an integral part of set and setting, leaning into complexity whilst also driving efficiency in trial design, is not just relevant to psychedelic trials. We're seeing increased interest in applying these approaches to other neighbouring treatment areas, so wider psychiatry development, neurodegeneration and neurodevelopment. Adoption of non-clinical research environments can have a huge impact on engagement and retention of populations where agitation and sensory overwhelm are common. While psychedelic clinical trials still have a lot of issues to overcome and a lot of improvements can be made, it's exciting to see the impact that this own kind of little unique area of clinical research can now actually have an impact on wider clinical development in other areas. And this is something that we're looking to drive forwards.